Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take on some of the universe's biggest ideas and really try to distill them into the sharpest nuggets of insight for you.
For the intellectually ravenous learner.
Exactly. And today, we are deep diving into a source that is just the perfect collision of, profound philosophy and some incredibly mundane, real-world drama. We're talking about the nature of consciousness, the absolute terror of quitting your day job, and a highly specific, successful prediction about a man's summer vacation on Cape Cod.
And that dichotomy, the cosmic and the almost petty, that's what makes this one so compelling. We are exploring Session 82 of the Early Sessions, Book 2 of Seth Material.
Okay.
Recorded on a Thursday, August 27, 1964. And the key thing here, right off the bat, is that this was an unscheduled session.
Right. It wasn't their usual Tuesday, Thursday thing.
Exactly. So that tells you immediately that something crucial, something particularly auspicious, in Seth's own words, was demanding their attention.
It really is like getting a middle-of-the-night emergency broadcast from the universe.
Yeah. And that urgency, it really sets our mission. We're distilling two major threads here, and they are very related.
Okay, so what's the first one?
First, you have the highest philosophical priority. This is Seth's absolute, non-negotiable directive on what the core message of the first published book has to be.
And not just the message, but the practical commitment required to actually get it done.
The radical commitment. And then second, you have the really satisfying, almost hilarious verification of two separate predictions that were given earlier.
Right. The proof.
The proof. One was about a local crime story unfolding in their hometown of Elmira, and the other mapped out their friend's vacation down to the haircut of a stranger.
It's just incredible. It's like the hard evidence was provided to justify the massive demand for commitment that was about to come.
That's the tension. That's what we're exploring.
And just before we jump into the chaos of consciousness forcing career changes, we are happy to declare that this deep dive, like all of our work here, is being distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes.
So let's start with that spark. The verification that happened right before the session kicked off.
Okay.
Joseph notes that their friend, John Bradley, had stopped by to give Jane or Ruburt some follow-up info. And it was about a prediction from way back in Session 63.
That was over 2 months earlier, right? June 17th.
Mm-hmm. Seth had predicted a narcotic scandal would happen in Elmira within 3 months.
And the calendar was definitely working against them. I mean, this prediction had a deadline, and with August ending, the clock was really running down.
It was, and the verification, it didn't come in some big headline. It came in layers, which kind of shows you that these predictions, they aren't always front-page news. Sometimes they're the synthesis of these small, connected, almost whispered events.
So what did Bradley tell them?
He detailed an incident that hadn't even made it into the mainstream paper. A man had been taken into custody for making the rounds of Elmira pharmacies with forged narcotics prescriptions.
Wow. So that's it. It's specific, concrete criminal activity right inside the predicted window.
Exactly. It confirms the narcotics scandal theme right at the ground level.
But this is where the story gets that delicious irony. The kind of thing that tells you how the collective psyche was working.
Right. The source material points to a story from the Elmira newspaper, August 23rd, just days before this session.
And the local authorities were actually publicly refuting claims from a national tabloid, the National Mirror.
Yes. The tabloid had published something sensational about a drug problem in Elmira, and the authorities were in the paper going, nope, not here. They were explicitly denying Elmira had a drug problem worth noting. But right there in the same paper, right next to the denial, was a small, seemingly unrelated news item.
About the doctor's bag.
About the theft of a doctor's black bag, which contained narcotics from his car in a hospital parking lot.
So the public statement is nothing to see here, while the literal evidence of criminal narcotic activity is printed on the same page.
It's the universe just giving a very pointed commentary on public perception versus hidden reality.
And then the follow-up sealed it, right?
It did. The source material notes a later follow-up that clarified everything. Attempts were made to use forged prescriptions from blanks taken from that very stolen black bag.
And not just in Elmira.
No, in drugstores in Corning, New York, which is only 10 miles away. So it wasn't just a vague vibe about drugs. It was a connected chain of events. A theft, forged prescriptions, movement across towns, and an official denial, all of it validating the scandal. It really underscores the accuracy, even when the public face of the town was saying the opposite.
And that success, that tangible validation of their work, That must have provided the psychic energy they needed for what came next.
Absolutely. It showed them that the entity they were channeling was operating with this granular, provable accuracy, which is, the perfect lead-in to talking about book one.
That transition is key, because right after the verification, Jen Ruburt, she suddenly gets this strong, spontaneous thought that it was time.
Time to start actively working on book one of the Seth Material. And she even got the title, The Physical Universe as Idea Construction. What a title. I mean, it sets the whole philosophical stage right there. And then the unscheduled session begins.
And Joseph noted that Jane received another thought, this one evidently from Seth, that Donald Wollheim, her editor at Ace Books, could or would write the introduction.
I love that detail. It is so wondrously bizarre. The cosmic entity dictating the nature of reality is also giving specific, actionable editorial guidance.
It's the perfect collision of the spiritual and the fiercely practical.
Absolutely. And Seth opens the session with this classic charm. He says, "I do not mean to add to your chores, Joseph. Nevertheless, for many reasons tonight seemed auspicious."
Auspicious indeed. So Rupert's internal readiness brings the idea forward, and Seth just immediately responds, pivoting straight to the architecture of this foundational book.
This is the moment he lays down the rules. He stresses that it must be the firm groundwork, because everything else, reincarnation, dream worlds, higher dimensions, it all has to stand on this foundation.
Without this base, all that other stuff just looks like fantasy or, wild speculation.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this core philosophical message, because this is the centerpiece of session 82. What is the single, absolute, most essential takeaway?
It's the statement that just radically overturns our perceived reality.
Just
That consciousness itself, it creates matter. That consciousness is not imprisoned by matter, but it forms it. And that it's not limited or bound by time or space.
That's the cornerstone. We're not physical beings having an occasional spiritual experience.
We're spiritual consciousness having a directed physical experiment. Yeah.
And that brings us to time and space itself, which we usually treat as this immutable container of reality. If consciousness creates it, then what are they?
Seth defines them as necessary distortions, or adopted conditions forming a strata for physical existence.
Necessary distortions. That's a huge distinction.
It is. They're not absolute. They're not eternal structures. They are self-imposed conditions, a framework, like a conceptual lens we apply to energy, so we can perceive it as solid and linear.
Like wearing special glasses to see a particular spectrum of light.
Perfect analogy. And Seth is explicit about why this matters. He says, once this is understood, all the rest of our material can be seen in the light of both logic and intuition.
So the deep ideas aren't meant to be taken just on faith. They have to withstand a logic test. But only after you accept that radical premise, that idea comes before matter.
Precisely.
So if that's the premise, how do you even begin to prove it? Seth doesn't just give them the conclusion. He mandates that they include the mechanics in book one.
Right. The book has to detail the mechanisms by which psychic energy or consciousness forms matter. It can't just be a declaration. It has to be a structural explanation.
And beyond that.
They have to introduce the incredibly complex idea that matter does not have duration.
Okay, that one is a brain melter. We assume this table, this microphone, it exists until it wears out. What does he mean, it has no duration?
It implies that physical matter isn't stable. It's not held in place by its own inertia.
So it's more like a projection.
Exactly. It's an ongoing, continuous projection of conscious energy. It's constantly being renewed, recreated in every single instant.
So if the conscious impulse stopped,
the matter would just cease to exist. Its stability is perceptual, not intrinsic. It's being continually idea constructed, which ties back perfectly to the title, The Physical Universe as Idea Construction. That's it.
That fundamentally changes our whole concept of stability. The physical universe is like a continuously rendered hologram, and our focus is what maintains the illusion of duration.
And that leads to the other concepts they had to include, which define the purpose and the scale of this whole construction.
You're talking about value fulfillment versus growth.
Yes. Seth mandates a discussion of the difference between value fulfillment and growth.
This is an area that's often confusing for new readers. Can we break that down?
Sure. Growth is often interpreted physically.
Right.
Expansion, accumulation, getting bigger, material success. It's quantitative.
More stuff.
More stuff. Value fulfillment, though, is qualitative. It's multidimensional. It's the process where consciousness expresses its ultimate potential, maximizing its innate abilities, achieving this complex self-expression through creative experience.
So it's the inherent drive of all that is to know itself.
And to express itself in infinite variety, yes.
So you could have, say, a giant, successful corporation, massive physical growth, but it could completely lack value fulfillment if it's just stifling the creative potential of everyone involved.
That's a perfect example. Value fulfillment is the deep spiritual imperative. Growth is often just a physical side effect or a limited goal inside the time-space framework.
And book one had to spell this out, showing the purpose isn't just to get bigger, but to expand in meaning.
Precisely.
And what about the dimensions? You mentioned the fifth dimension and the expanding universe.
Right. So these concepts, they elevate the discussion from personal reality creation to universal dynamics. The fifth dimension in the Seth Material is usually described as the realm of subjective reality.
The level where ideas exist as tangible things before they become matter in our world.
Yes, the framework of probability and potentiality. And the expanding universe part connects our personal consciousness back to that grand scale. It shows this whole principle of creation isn't static, it's dynamic.
It's constantly operating, infinitely. The universe isn't just expanding physically, but in potential, in expression.
All driven by that collective impulse of value fulfillment.
So if book one manages to convey all of this, what's the immediate global implication for humanity?
It's revolutionary, especially for the behavioral sciences. Seth says when man realizes he himself creates his personal and universal environment in concrete terms, he can stop just reacting to circumstance.
And start actively creating a superior environment.
Yes.
How would that change something like psychiatry, which is so rooted in material causes, chemical imbalances?
Well, if consciousness is primary, then mental illness or distress, it's not viewed as a chemical deficit so much as a structural failure in idea construction.
Faulty beliefs that are being successfully manifested.
Right. So the treatment shifts from managing symptoms to altering the core beliefs that are generating the unwanted manifestation. It brings radical responsibility, but also radical power back to the person.
That's a huge therapeutic shift, from pathology to creative misdirection. And Seth argues this is the only way to properly introduce reincarnation later on.
Precisely. The idea of past lives seems logical in a linear time frame. But Seth says when you realize you create your own image now, it's not so startling to believe that he creates other images in other times.
So accepting self-creation now is the required first step to accepting multi-life existence.
It is. Reincarnation achieves its natural validity only after that basis is accepted. If you understand matter as fluid idea construction, then the continuity of the consciousness doing the constructing becomes logical.
And he gets into the mechanics of that, too.
He stresses that certain deeper layers of the subconscious are a direct link, a continuous thread between the present personality and past ones. It's not a chain of separate lives. It's a simultaneous continuum.
That is an enormous task to lay on two writers. But Seth doesn't stop at philosophy. He immediately dives into the cold, hard, logistical, and emotional reality of getting it done.
The transition is jarring, isn't it? But it's necessary. After discussing the architecture of the cosmos, he gets straight down to editorial brass tacks.
He tells him to get Wollheim for the intro, and he lays down rules for handling the text.
Yeah, practical ground rules. First, the material should be copied faithfully, not paraphrased, though they can delete for repetition.
And the structure.
The structure should be a grouping of subject matter, not a chronological page-by-page rendition. The book needed to be thematic to be accessible.
And of course, they had to write an intro explaining how it all came about.
Right. Give the reader context.
It's just fascinating how detailed the instructions are. But then this practical advice quickly moves into the real challenge, the emotional and financial one, which is arguably the deepest lesson here.
This is where Seth goes from editorial guide to demanding life coach. He starts addressing the fundamental resistance in Jane and Joseph. He knows the philosophy is useless if they can't apply it to their own lives.
And he uses the house as a metaphor, the house analogy.
Yeah, he brings up their failure to finalize buying a house as a prime example of a lack of what we may call faith.
They wanted it, they needed the space, but when it came time to commit, the doubts about money held them back.
And Seth, he even preempts Joseph's skepticism about the word faith. You know, with Joseph's scientific background, faith can sound like irrationality.
But Seth reframes it.
He does. He gives this powerful counter-argument. He says, no new concept or idea or discovery ever came unless there was first faith that it indeed existed. Every invention, every breakthrough, it requires that internal conviction that the outcome is possible.
So he redefines faith as expectation backed by energy.
Yes. If you expect failure, that expectation creates the conditions for it. If you don't really believe the book will sell, that lack of conviction sabotages the whole effort.
And Seth cuts right to the heart of it.
He does. He says he has to work within the limitations of both of your doubts, and your doubts and only your doubts will hold us back. He's putting the brakes squarely on them, not the channel. The barrier is their resistance.
That's a direct challenge. You are manifesting your own blocks.
Yeah.
And then comes the truly radical suggestion, the one he admits will cause automatic horror.
It's great. The notes say Jane was actually amused at this point because she could feel Seth's humor, anticipating Joseph's fear.
And the suggestion was,
Simple and financially terrifying. Ruburt should quit his afternoon job at the gallery immediately and dedicate that specific time, the afternoon, to working on book 1.
wait, so they're struggling financially, they're writing a book about creating reality, and the advice is to cut off a reliable source of income.
It's the ultimate test of their own philosophy, isn't it?
It is. If consciousness creates reality, then forcing the need for income through the creative work should manifest the reward.
He is forcing them to live the teaching, pushing them beyond intellectual acceptance into absolute, undeniable physical commitment.
And Joseph's role in this?
Joseph, the recorder, must keep doing the sessions, but is explicitly told not to take time from his own painting to help with the book. The focus had to be on Rupert's writing commitment.
Why was quitting the job so essential? Why couldn't Ruburt just be more disciplined and work on it when he had time, keep the safety net? Seth explains it very precisely. Commitment is dependent upon expectation.
By keeping the gallery job, that safe fallback, they fail to generate the necessary expectation and the full energy release needed to manifest success. The safety net acts like a siphon. It subtly drains the energy of conviction from the main goal.
That is such a relatable psychological block. We keep the side hustle because we don't truly expect our main passion to fully support us.
And Seth even validates this with a fascinating counterfactual. He points out that if Ruburt had quit the gallery when his novel was first published,
He would by now have 1.5 times his present income from writing.
that is just astonishing. A precise, quantifiable, alternative financial reality based on a decision they didn't take. It wasn't that the writing wasn't good enough. It was the lack of expectation holding back the reward.
So by closing off that external income, you force the generation of the emotional and psychic energy to make the writing sell.
Exactly. And Seth is clear. No magic will give the same result. He can't just manifest a bestseller for them, the expectation, the belief, the energy it has to come from their commitment. Quitting the job is the physical action that activates that expectation. So the ultimate goal of putting this philosophy to practical ends is taking this radical step. He tells them they should be able, through using them, to manipulate matter more advantageously. This isn't just about cosmic ideas, it's about paying the bills with applied consciousness. And the commitment to the book becomes the catalyst for proving the philosophy. If Ruburt follows the schedule mornings for his own work, afternoons for Seth's, then the time for the book to be finished would be ripe.
The timing is intentional.
Very specific. And to drive the point home, he brings up that weird analogy about fixing the car.
Right, to illustrate the tendency to want the psychic fix over the practical work.
It's a wonderful analogy. He says Ruburt fixed the car in his own psychic manner. He mentally fiddled with it and it started. But Seth added that Ruburt never would have used a physical screwdriver to fix it, even if he'd had one.
So what does that say about Ruburt's resistance?
It suggests he often defaults to the psychic method, the quick internal workaround, when the practical, committed physical action, the screwdriver, in this case working on the book, is what's truly required.
So the psychic fix gives you a temporary result, but it bypasses the structural commitment needed for long-term achievement.
And that's the fear. It's not just financial. It's a fear of committing fully to the creative process, to the risk. Seth says Ruburt is aware of this pent-up energy that should go into his work, but he was and is afraid of commitment to his own work, much less mine.
That fear is the safety brake on creation.
It is. And Seth concludes that quitting the job, while seemingly foolish, is the most practical step that you could take. It forces the energetic requirement for success.
That synthesis of philosophy and finance is the real core here. But now we get to transition from those radical demands to the entertaining proof, the detailed verification about their friend, Bill McDonnell, and his trip to Provincetown.
This case study is vital. It's the concrete evidence that justifies the demands. And this wasn't a general prediction. This was highly detailed stuff about a place Jane and Joseph had never even been.
Okay, so let's start with the first predictions from session 68, back in July, before Bill even left. What were those random details?
Seth foresaw two specific things. First, Bill would meet a man, perhaps 50 years old, with prickly hair. Second, he'd see a rowboat with a symbol of some sort on it.
These are arbitrary, non-essential details, the perfect litmus test. So Bill comes back on August 29th. How close was the prickly hair description?
Remarkably close, but with a fascinating little translational error. The man Bill met was 54, right around the predicted age of 50. But the prickly hair was actually a brush cut. They met at the Old Colony bar.
Prickly hair versus a brush cut. That difference is where the analysis gets interesting. Why the minor error? Is the channel imperfect, or is Seth translating an energetic quality? A brush cut is visually prickly.
I lean toward that. The core energetic signature stiffness, a bristly feel, was accurately perceived. The translation into the specific physical term was just slightly off. The core identity of the person, though, age and meeting place, was spot on.
And the rowboat with the symbol. Bill said he didn't see one.
This is the second example of that translational shift. Bill didn't notice the boats. However, the man he met, the guy with the brush cut, he wore a cap with an anchor symbol on it.
So the symbol was present, it was associated with the predicted person, but it was transposed from a boat to the man's hat.
The elements were psychically linked, even if the physical location of the symbol shifted. It suggests seeing the energetic context, not a fixed physical snapshot.
Joseph noted in the session that they didn't think the hat was what Seth meant.
Right, but analytically, the probability of finding a man of that specific age with that haircut quality at that bar and finding a relevant symbol on him is just, it's extremely low unless the info was psychic.
Okay, now let's get to the more complex predictions from Session 75, which mapped out a whole setting in Provincetown.
Yes, this one detailed multiple concurrent facts. Bill would make two friends, one older, one his age. He'd be near water at a bar with a large keg, see two houses nearby, a front room across from a beach, and be in a group with 4 men.
So the friends first. Were the details exact? They were confirmed precisely. Bill was 27. He made 2 friends who were central to his vacation. Gary, an artist from Boston who was 25 his age, and Larry O'Toole, an artist from Baltimore, 50 or so, the older man, and the physical locale confirmation. This paints an almost impossibly detailed picture for someone who had never been there. The physical details are the ultimate proof. The older artist, Larry O'Toole, rented a cottage with a very specific feature, a front room across from a beach. And this was unusual.
Incredibly. Bill stressed that a front room overlooking the water was rather an unusual one in Provincetown because of how cramped and chaotic the properties were.
So the consciousness perceived an unusual vantage point that defined Bill's whole social life there.
Precisely. And that central meeting spot tied together the other elements. The 2 houses nearby referred to the 2 joined cottages, one of which O'Toole rented.
And the bar with the keg?
Just 3 blocks down the street was the Atlantic House, and it had the large keg.
Now, was this just a typical beer keg? Because that wouldn't be very specific.
No, it was a striking display, which is what would make it psychically prominent. The bar had a very large keg, cut in half, and set into the wall as a distinct decorative feature. It wasn't just a keg, it was the large, unique keg right there.
Incredible. And the social group, in a group with 4 men.
Confirmed. Bill went to a party at O'Toole's cottage. It was Bill, Gary, Larry, and 2 other men, a total of 5 people. So Bill was literally in a group with 4 men.
The grammar held up perfectly. What about the dock and the shells?
The dock was visible from the front room, and it had boats, plural, though Seth used the singular, minor difference, and the string of shells. Bill only vaguely recalled shell ashtrays at the party. That one was a bit of a miss, or maybe another translation shift.
But the final crucial element here is the distance. Jane and Joseph had no physical reference points for any of this.
That's the critical takeaway. Neither of them had ever been to Provincetown or Cape Cod. The information was purely psychic, pulled from Bill's future reality. There was no way to guess these unusual details.
And to cap it all off, Bill, being an artist, had even painted the area, which provided a visual confirmation of the location Seth had mapped out. It is the perfect, detailed proof needed to justify the demand for radical commitment. The message is clear. This material is verifiable, accurate, and powerful, so the demands placed on you to apply it are also warranted. Which brings us back to the central synthesis of Session 82. We've seen the evidence, the narcotics, and Cape Cod. We understand the core philosophy that consciousness creates reality. So what's the crucial lesson connecting the two?
The crucial synthesis is that commitment is the non-negotiable engine.
Say that again.
Commitment is the engine that translates belief into material reality. The universe can verify its subtle awareness of brush cuts and forged prescriptions, but it requires your dedicated, focused energy to bring major creative work into the world.
So consciousness can whisper details about a vacation to prove itself, but it won't step in and remove the financial fear that's holding the author back.
That barrier has to be addressed through a physical, deliberate act of commitment. Quitting job.
And that act is a direct application of the philosophy. If you keep the safety net, you're believing the creative work can't sustain you. If you remove it, you're forcing the expectation that it must.
In Seth's final words on this, they really emphasize accountability, especially for Ruburt. He says the intuitive self knows the creative potential, but the conscious self lets fear hold the energy captive.
He was and is afraid of commitment to his own work, much less mine.
That pent-up energy, suppressed by the fear of being impractical, that's the critical element. The decision to quit, so seemingly foolish, was designed to liberate that blocked expectation and force the energy into the creative channels that would generate success.
The most profound philosophy required the most mundane and terrifyingly practical step to be realized.
That's it.
And that truly is the big question this session leaves us with, and the final provocative thought for you, the listener. If the entire universe waits for your explicit expectation and commitment before delivering major results, where in your own life are you maintaining a safety net out of fear? Where are you holding back, afraid that your inner convictions, the projects, the aspirations, the work you truly want to commit to, might be deemed impractical by the outside world?
The power, according to this material, lies not in hoping for magic, but in the deliberate, unavoidable commitment that proves your belief in your own creative capacity.
A fantastic, detailed, and really eye-opening deep dive. Thank you for joining us on this exploration. And remember that the source material we discussed, Session 82 of the Early Sessions Book 2 of Seth Material, is published by New Awareness Network.
And we strongly encourage you to study the books and material further. You can explore the full history of the Seth Sessions by visiting the New Awareness Network website and bookstore. That's at sethcenter.com/early sessions.
Go forth, be committed, and we will catch you on the next Neural Dive.